Volcarona! Cobalion!
No, we're not doing that. No, I ain't pronouncing it like that. It's Cobalion, okay? That is the false swipe retcon right now. Evildoers beware, for there is a sword of justice afoot in the form of Cobalion. It, like the three musketeers that it's based on, is the leader of the group, being the oldest and wisest. This status was on full display in the Pokemon movie Karen vs. the Sword of Justice. Others may remember encountering Cobalion in the Generation 5 games, especially when it appears before the player in Black and White 2. Today we'll be exploring Cobalion's impact on the competitive scene. And once again, we ask, how good was Cobalion actually? But before we start, once again, this video is sponsored by Manscaped.com. Did you know that 1 man every hour of every day is diagnosed with testicular cancer? Testicular cancer is the most common form of cancer in men ages 15 to 35. For one last time, Manscaped is bringing back their special edition TCS Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer. These were available back in April and sold out within 10 days. Manscaped has partnered with the Testicular Cancer Society to help you take care of that nether region. So while you're trimming down there, Manscaped and the Testicular Cancer Society want to remind you to check yourself for testicular cancer with easy, once-a-month routine, at-home self-health check. But that's not all. This limited edition trimmer is a collectible item. There are only 15,000 units available, so make sure to get yours today while supplies last. Once they're gone, they are gone for good. The TCS Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer features ceramic blades with skin-safe technology. This helps reduce nicks and cuts where they matter most. It's waterproof and cordless, so you can trim in the shower, and this also makes cleanup super easy too. For more info on how you can perform simple, routine self-checks at home, or if you want to help support their mission to shave balls and save balls, learn more by visiting manscaped.com/TCS or donating at testicularcancersociety.org. As always, you can use my promo code FALSESWIPE for 20% off plus free shipping at manscaped.com. Join the Manscaped movement and don't forget to take care of your pair. And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. In Generation 4, Lucario had leveraged its amazing steel and fighting typing to phenomenal results in spite of its frailty. Thus, with Cobalion sharing this typing, but also packing incredible physical bulk as well as an amazing base 108 speed stat, the player base certainly had some hopes for it, as it was rife with potential, especially given its outstanding move pool. Sadly, Cobalion's base 90 attack was positively paltry by OU standards. Sure, its fellow Sword of Justice Virizion, but Virizion also had an amazing secondary stab, while Cobalion's steel stab was next to useless in pre-fairy times. Gen 5 OU had no shortage of excellent fighting types as a whole. After all, the tier was famous for getting torn apart by yet another Sword of Justice, Terrakion, packing both amazing dual stab and an enormous attack stat. As such, Cobalion fell to UU, where its talents were put to far better use. Despite the tier also being littered with excellent fighting types, Cobalion was as legitimate a part of the metagame as any of them. Its talent came less from being an offensive threat, not that it wasn't decent in such a role, because it was, but it was more prized for the widespread team support it provided between its resistance-laden typing, alongside amazing physical bulk and speed. Thus, even when using Swords Dance variants, it brought a lot to its team, a uniquely appreciated quality, but it could also go all out in team support by utilizing its plethora of utility moves. This was the more important side of Cobalion's niche, because even at +2 attack, it didn't hit too hard, and UU had no shortage of physical Pokemon capable of shrugging off its hits. Not to say that it couldn't pose a threat against severely weakened teams thanks to its speed, but more useful throughout battles on a consistent basis was Cobalion's aptitude at shrugging off several hits that tore through most of the rest of the tier. Cobalion could surprise the physical hit takers expecting its Swords Dance variant by going with a special attacking Calm Mind instead, but that was inconsistent because its coverage was worse. Its power issues were exacerbated because it wasn't boosting as quickly. And of course, it relied on the worst move in the game, Focus Blast, as its stab. Whichever set Cobalion went with though, its defensive profile was excellent. Steel types were rare in UU, and Cobalion was thus valued for how Flygon and Dredagon's outrages simply bounce off of it. So did Snorlax's normal stab, with Cobalion's huge physical bulk, meaning it wasn't scared of the accompanying Earthquake either, and it threatened Lax super effectively in return. Cobalion was one of the best Lax checks in the tier, and this was incredible considering how dominant Snorlax was. So 2 was its quadruple resistance to Heracross's mighty Mega Horn, with that ability to take on bug moves also making it superb at switching into the metagame's many U-turns, sometimes even punishing them with Rocky Helmet. Additionally, its quadruple resistance to Dark, especially when it came to dealing with Sucker Punch. This was especially useful given how many threats spammed this move, from Swords Dance Mew to Dredagon to Honchkrow to even Bisharp. Cobalion's final quadruple resistance to Rock also made it apt at switching into battle repeatedly thanks to how little it took from Stealth Rock. In fact, it belonged to that rare category of Pokemon for whom leftovers would actually out-heal Rock's damage. It was generally difficult to take Cobalion down with physical hits. Common neutral attacks like Crobat's Brave Bird were nowhere near threatening, and even powerful super effective moves like Rhyperior Earthquake didn't come close to actually KOing it, doing when it hit the field. While it tended to dart in and out of battle, helping play around opposing threats while helping soften up the opposition, often gradually or systematically. This was most explicit when it leaned into utility. It didn't just set up Stealth Rock for its team, though it was fantastic at getting them up, with its great speed and bulk making it immensely difficult for opponents to stop it from doing so, but it also provided momentum and switching opportunities for his teammates with another one of the best moves in the game, Volt Switch. Wanted to block it with a bulky ground type? You'd find yourself toxic in a heartbeat. A move that also happily messed with other Cobalion checks like Slowbro, Cresselia, and Cofagrigus, which made it even more adept at taking on the metagame's many hits, really driving home how excellent its team support was. All in all, Cobalion was a bit of a black sheep in UU, but the utility it brought to its team was invaluable, whether defensively, offensively, or, as was most common, a mix of both, and thus it was an important part of the metagame, capping off a successful debut generation. Generation 6's mechanics changes did not go unnoticed by Cobalion. Steel no longer resisting Dark was fine since its fighting type ensured it was still a Dark resist. And no longer resisting Ghost wasn't really a problem since Cobalion wasn't much of a Ghost answer anyway. In fact, Cobalion would be using its Dark resistance quite often now thanks to the buff to Knockoff, and switching into Knockoff would actually give it an attack boost thanks to its justified ability. Also, the addition of the Fairy type was just fine by Cobalion since it now had an actually useful secondary stat. Its own typing meant it was a fighting type that wasn't weak to Fairy, which was also valuable, though its low special defense, of course, meant it didn't exactly relish the prospect of eating Moonblast. It could still take weak ones, and it wouldn't fear Play Rough. As a result of power creep, Cobalion began the generation in RU, and there it was absolutely excellent. It mostly cycled between 3 sets, though they had their specific variations such as an item choice, Swords Dance, offensive Stealth Rock as opposed to the previous generation's pure utility rocker, and the occasional Calm Minder. Cobalion's high speed and more effective Steel Stab meant it was apt at consistently, immediately threatening a wide portion of the tier, which made it a crucial part of a team's offensive output, whether it was softening up opposing cores with chip damage and the momentum, creating capabilities of fast Volt Switch, or acting as one of the nastiest late game finishers in the tier with its sweeping sets. With the lower power level of the tier, Cobalion's base 90 attack was no longer underwhelming. In fact, it was just right, especially considering how strong its offensive moves were, both in terms of base power and super effective damage to go along with their boosts. And of course, it did this while having amazing natural defensive presence, most notably completely stifling the brutally powerful hustle boosted stabs of another one of the scariest pokes in the tier, Durant. As a result of being one of the best offensive pokes while also being great defensively, Cobalion was one of the best, most defining presences in the tier throughout XY, and didn't miss a beat as it continued this excellence into ORAS. In fact, once some of its best checks left the tier, Cresselia and Reuniclus most notably, some players began making the argument that Cobalion was not just good offensively, it was bordering on or even outright broken. It was around this time that Cobalion left RU, but it wasn't because it was banned. It was because the UU player base had begun using Cobalion so much that it rose to the tier via usage, becoming an official UU Pokemon. UU Cobalion was pretty much the same Pokemon as in RU, a wickedly useful Swiss Army knife of an offensive utility poke with Stealth Rock or a lethal Swords Dancer, with an occasional surprising foray into Calm Mind. It just fit incredibly well into the UU environment. Cobalion was an especially terrifying setup sweeper because of how effortlessly it could slot Magnet Rise into its moveset, completely turning the tables on would-be checks like Nidoqueen and Gligar, who would become setup fodder instead, completely unable to touch it. Cobalion's justified ability in conjunction with its natural threat level was also an excellent punisher of knockoff, so much much so that Cobalion's very presence in team preview wound up being an efficient dissuasion of the move being used in that battle. Plus, as was Cobalion's MO by this point, it brought alongside its offensive presence amazing defensive utility as well. Notably, it was a fantastic check to the terrifying Mega Aerodactyl, made even better if it ran the Shukaberry it often did to make itself more threatening offensively, as well as the fact that it was a check that was incredibly offensively threatening in its own right, as opposed to a slower, bulkier Pokemon or a Choice Scarfer, with a great deal of that threat coming from Cobalion's naturally excellent speed. Cobalion was phenomenal pretty much no matter what it did, and facilitated a great many teams with its presence, capping off a stupendously successful Generation 6. Oh, and as a fun footnote, Cobalion was never anywhere near a true OU Pokemon, but it was used on the smallest handful of occasions in both XY and ORAS for its ability to act as a perfect answer to the terrifying Bisharp, while either grabbing momentum for its team with Volt Switch or even potentially threatening stalled teams with Calm Mind, since it was a special sweeper whose stab Chansey wanted no part of. Cobalion returned to UU once again in Generation 7, launched to even higher levels of threat with the addition of Z Crystals. Whether it was Swords Dancing or Calm Minding, they provided it a one-time bomb with which it could bypass its low attack stat and crush the opponent's check, leaving teams unable to withstand its follow-up assault. It wasn't just useful for blowing opposing teams apart either. In true Cobalion fashion, it could use the instant power to extend its ability to act as an offensive check to opposing threats. Cobalion was so excellent as both support and offense that its Swords Dance set regularly ran Stealth Rock as well, and the presence of it taking on one role did not at all diminish its effectiveness, as though it were trying to do too much with one set. On the contrary, the presence of both made it as threatening as possible. Early game, get up rocks. Mid to late game, do big damage and maybe destroy the entire rest of the team. It could slot Rock Polish in its last slot to act as an even more effective late game sweeper, effortlessly jetting past would-be revenge killers. No Scarfer was gonna get the jump on it. Making Cobalion's cleanup task even easier was the fact that it utterly obliterated the common Scarfers, Hydreigon, and Crocodile, and it effortlessly shrugged off the most common priority, Scizzor's Bullet Punch. Cobalion generally stuck with Fighting Z on both Swords Dance and Calm Mind sets, as it was most reliable with the highest power available to it via close combat and Focus Blast, getting strengthened into all-out pummeling. But it could also surprise the opponent with Swords Dance boosted Steelium Z, where Corkscrew Crush helped it blast through the likes of Gligar and Celebi. Its real surprise though lay in its Calm Mind set. Calm Mind Cobalion was a surprise in and of itself, but it could also use Electrium Z to boost Volt Switch of all moves into a Gigavolt Havoc that would destroy would-be answers in Moltres and Tentacruel. Of course, Cobalion was far from reliant on Z moves to function. With Rocky Helmet, it was one of the best punishers of Scizzor's otherwise irritatingly spammable U-turn, while Shukaberry nullifying opposing Earthquake as counterplay could be outright game-changing. No matter what Cobalion did, it excelled. Cobalion was superb at sticking around and could fulfill so many roles, and it was massively flexible in battle situations. That type of adaptability, both in set and in battle, was a big part of what made it so easy to slap on a team and achieve results with. Chalk up another highly successful generation of UU for it. Cobalion joined the fray in Generation 8 with the release of Pokemon Home, in an environment containing far and away the most limited Pokedex it had ever been privy to. It wasn't quite enough for OU, but it immediately ranked among UU's elite. It was unquestionably the tier's best Steel type by some margin. It checked an enormous swath of the other excellent Pokemon around, like Rhyperior, Roserade, Incineroar, Pangoro, Sylveon, and Copperajah, to name but a few. Its Swords Dance variants were terrific as always, but the player base quickly latched on to the widespread utility of its Stealth Rock variant. Its stabs hit everything so well even without setup, so this allowed it to support its team more immediately easily, rather than waiting for the late game where SD was actually a viable move to be clicked. Especially as using rocks on Cobalion also came with the significant benefit of freeing up the move on a teammate. Cobalion's excellent moveset flexibility in supporting its team and making itself more threatening was on full display with its malleable last move slot, Volt Switch. Volt Switch was an easy default to mess with the dual blade that otherwise walled it, but Thunderwave quickly made an appearance to utterly ruin Noivern, which was the best Pokemon in the tier and happened to love switching into Cobalion. Now that's amazing team support. The Isle of Armor came around, and the additions of new Cobalion checks in Tentacruel, Talonflame, and both Cantonian and Galarian Slowbro briefly fooled the player base into thinking that Cobalion wasn't quite on par with its previous excellence, but they quickly realized that this was not but a fugazi, as Cobalion's defensive utility had actually increased with the addition of new threats. It completely completely stifled the massively irritating Zarude, and was pretty much the only Pokemon offensive teams could switch into Obstagoon's vicious stabs while outrunning and threatening to KO it after. This was crucial, as Obstagoon would otherwise pretty much claim an automatic KO. It could even live a guts-boosted close combat if need be. Cobalion was no mere defensive presence either. It became an utterly vicious offensive monster, which wound up delighting at the prospects of coming face to face with the two Slowbro forms, for this would give it the opportunity to eviscerate them with its newly gained Mega Horn, a move that also allowed it to brutalize other would-be answers in Celebi and Reuniclus. Once again, Cobalion was the tier's reigning steal, and not far off from being the best Pokemon as a whole. Its incredible speed tier in conjunction with its great physical bulk, offensive threat, and utility move pool made it one of the most complete Pokemon available, which made it one of the best Pokemon you could ask for in dealing with opposing threats ranging from Porygon Z to Mimikyu to Mamoswine to Crocodile to the aforementioned Obstagoon. The Crown Tundra's cruel power creep crippled Cobalion's UU viability, sending it crashing down to RU. Fortuitously, it found itself in the tier with many familiar UU mainstays: Noivern, Mienshao, Diggersby, Obstagoon, and Zarude. So in large part, it wound up playing like it did in the tier above, meaning that Cobalion was one of the most excellent, highly spammed RU Pokemon. It checked what felt like nearly every physical attacker: Metagross, Golisopod, Linoon, and far more. Throwing Cobalion onto your team was so desirable because it so effortlessly checked so much and was so threatening in its own right. Thanks to its great coverage and ability to boost to dangerous levels, it blasted through the tier's fighting resists like Reuniclus without much trouble, while bulky non-fighting resists like Milotic weren't exactly jazzed to take on its close combat, to say the least, and common walls like Umbreon were perfect opportunity for Cobalion to grab a safe switch. Cobalion's outstanding place in RU came to an abrupt halt once the player base realized once again it was terrific in UU. Their previous misgivings centered around their preferences for fighters that were stronger outright, like Conkeldurr and Mienshao, which were two of the best Pokemon around and seemingly outweighed Cobalion's utility in Stealth Rock, especially as Cobalion was a steel type that couldn't check threats steels were generally used for in UU at the time, such as Alakazam, Latias, and Kyurem. However, those Pokemon were banned in that order, with Kyurem actually getting the axe from OU, but that's not all. UU also started seeing high usage from Nihilego, Scizor, and Zarude, against whom Cobalion matched up beautifully, and thus it began to flourish. Even the arrival of Aegislash, the best Cobalion answer conceivable, couldn't slow it down. Thunderous Incarnate had been banned, and thus Cobalion could use its excellent speed to help check the slower Thunderous Styrian. Furthermore, players realized that Cobalion could be paired with other steals like Celesteela, Scizor, or Aegislash itself to compensate for Cobalion's UU-centric flaws as a steal, i.e. not resisting Fairy, Flying, or Psychic. Then Aegislash was banned, and Cobalion really took off. The list of things it checked just grew larger and larger, from Scarf Diggersby to Hydreigon to the aforementioned trio of Nihilego, Scizor, and Zarude. It loved tacking on a Shuka Berry as its item, giving it greater security against not just Diggersby, but even Excadrill and Zygarde 10% of all things. Plus, once Sleep Clause was active, Cobalion switched with impunity into the otherwise irritating Amoonguss. This was just its defensive profile too. There was also the fact that it was an offensive terror, with UU's defensive staples not exactly confident against its post-Swords Dance. Amoonguss was helpless, Skarmory got blasted by boosted close combat, Tangrowth and Slowking were ripped to shreds by Mega Horde, and Salamence wasn't exactly super confident against Ironhead, to say nothing of Cobalion's occasional tendency to slot in Stone Edge. Options for dealing with Cobalion through outspeeding it were also limited, not just because Cobalion was so fast, but because something like Crobat didn't exactly threaten it in return at all. You were pretty much limited to Starmie and Noivern in this vein. Everything about Cobalion was so outstanding, and players appreciated it more as they used it, and with one of its best qualities being how impossible it was to punish its use, it so consistently matched up well against such an enormous slew of the rest of the metagame, and it was always going to put in the work. It wasn't just great, it was the single best Pokemon in UU. The conclusion it had been working towards seemingly forever, beautifully capping off Cobalion's most successful generation yet. And that's it. So how good was Cobalion actually? Well, it's been excellent in UU generation after generations. Its debut was solid, if a bit understated, but ever since Gen 6, it has been utterly phenomenal in the tier. Sure, it had multiple forays into RU, where it has always been elite as well, funnily enough, but by and large, Cobalion is a UU icon, a concept made most resoundingly clear in how it eventually came to be the tier's single best Pokemon in Generation 8. Overall, Cobalion has been an absolutely amazing lower tier presence for so long, and we can't wait to see how it adds to its legacy with Iron Crown and its Tachyon Cutter soon. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Cobalion? What would you give it to have it be an OU staple? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. And thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.